people that are very progressive, that lean very far left, they seem to also hate our country.
They do.
The message to them, well, let's go try and live in Russia or China or Iran or any of these places. You wouldn't exist.
I'm very concerned that on many of those things, we're sliding into something that really isn't who we are.
This whole progressive movement that's going on here, Konstantin, is insane.
I think we have a limited amount of time to turn this around. And if we don't, we will not survive in the way that we currently think of what the West is. There's a difference between being the most powerful nation in history, as the Roman Empire was at the time, and selling ice cream on the ruins of that former great civilization. It's not the same thing. I really wouldn't want the West to end up going downhill, and one of the reasons is I have seen the other side. I've been to other places. I've grown up in other places. Believe me, you do not want Russia to be the dominant country in the world or China to be the dominant country in the world, because the things you hold dear, they're not going to be respected in the same way that they currently are.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. Everything is very good, very blessed on this end. As always, I give all the praise, honor, glory, and thanksgiving to our God for that. Not too long ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with a very interesting guy. His name is Konstantin Kisin. And I had met him originally in the United Kingdom when I was promoting my tour. He got in touch with me, or his staff got in touch with our people, and they said, we'd like to have Michael on their podcast, which is called Triggernometry. And he co-hosts that with a fellow called Franzese, and we sat down for about an hour and a half and had a very interesting conversation. And what he bills his show as is as honest conversations with fascinating people. So thank you for thinking I'm fascinating. He's also had some great guests on there, Jordan Peterson among them. And it was just a great conversation. And I saw that, this guy really knows what he's talking about. It's very interesting. So we got in touch with him again and asked him to come on my platform. And I do this interview with him, which you're going to see in a few minutes. And he's a very intelligent guy. He spoke at Oxford University, got rave reviews for that. He's known to be a bit controversial. They like to say that he's anti-woke. But, people, they say anti-woke to anybody that doesn't agree with those people that are woke. But I like to think of people that just have a good take, a reasonable, sensible, honest take on issues, whether they be woke or far right or whatever. And I don't think he's far right. I think you'll find that out when you look at the interview. But it was very, very interesting. And we talked about a number of things of importance. Now, he is a Russian. He's of Russian and British ancestry. And right now, he lives in the United Kingdom. So it's always good to have a perspective from people outside of the United States on some things that are going on in this country. Because people, I will tell you this. I travel a lot. I'm going to Europe again next week. Going to be with the Tate brothers again. I'm looking forward to that. We're going to sit down, have an honest talk about issues that are going on, not only in this country, but in the world. And you know that Andrew and Tristan, they speak their mind. And whether you like it or not, they speak their mind. They speak from the heart, I think, and we're going to have some good conversation about it. But I really appreciate that. And while I was traveling, so many people, I got to tell you, Michael, what's happening in your country? What's going on in your country? This has been the general conversation or the general thought process from people everywhere. And there's a lot of stuff going on. We got a chaotic situation, and it's always good to hear from somebody. So I think you're going to enjoy the conversation. I certainly did, and I like that. I enjoy talking to people that are intelligent, have a good take on things, and I like to share it with my audience. So without any further delay, here is my interview with Konstantin Kisin. I walk in redemption. How was the experience with Jordan? Had to be great, huh?
It was amazing. He's you meet a lot of people, I'm sure you do as well, and lots of people talk a good game. It's very different when somebody walks the path that they're telling other people to walk, and you get to see that up close. So the first thing I saw with Jordan is he really practices what he preaches. And that's hard because what he preaches is hard, right? Like, don't ever go down the wrong path. Always make the right decision. Listen to your conscience. Don't take shortcuts. Tell the truth even when it's super uncomfortable. Like, all of that stuff doesn't really come naturally to human beings, I think. And I just watched him for 3 weeks do that. All his crew love him. From his security to his tour manager, everybody. He's exactly the same way with 4 people as he is with 10,000 people. I remember one time in particular, we had a series of shows back to back in Texas. I think it was Houston, Dallas, and El Paso. And El Paso was the show in the middle. And by this point, Jordan, he picked up a cold on the tour. He wasn't very well. And it was 3 dates in a row. So we done a show the night before, then wake up in the morning, get on the plane, arrive, and we get to a restaurant, obviously steakhouse. It's the only thing he eats. I thought I loved steak. By the end of the trip, I was having fish because I can't eat this much steak.
When I had my interview with him, he was the most in-depth interviewer that I ever had. It was funny, you know, I got to relate this. I want to see what you think about it. You know, Jordan said to me, well, Michael, you know, what do you think about lying? And I said, well, you know, my father taught me something. He said, you know, son, don't ever lie to hurt somebody, but if you have to lie to help somebody, that's okay. And I said, and so Jordan said, have you adopted that principle? And I said, yes, I have. He said, well, that's not good because a liar is a liar is a liar. And we went into this whole thing, and I'm wondering at the end, I said, did he convince me? I don't know. You know, I was really questioning myself about it. And then another thing he did that really got me, Konstantin, he said, you know, Michael, obviously when you were in that life, you did some things that were questionable and it was bad behavior. And I said, you're right. He said, well, how did you accomplish that? Because you look like, you know, a pretty nice guy right now. And I said, well, you know what, Jordan, I said, I did things that were uncomfortable for me at the time, but I guess I kind of stepped out of myself, did what I had to do, and then stepped back in. And then came a question I didn't expect. He said, well, how do you know which was the real Michael?
Mm.
And I said, wow. I said, well, you know, hopefully for the past 25 years or so since I left that life, I've been pretty much devoid of that kind of behavior. So hopefully this is the real one.
Yeah.
You know, but it was really amazing. We spent it was about a 2-hour interview, and it was really something. And then going to his show, I noticed every question that was asked was a 20-minute answer. 25-minute answer as he paced back and forth across the stage and just really gave it some thought. So the bottom line, you've experienced, I have. He's a fascinating guy and certainly a good person to know and to have associated with. Well, my friends, Michael Franzese here, and I am very excited to introduce to you all our non-alcoholic wine. Really excited and proud about this because I'll tell you why. Our process is a little bit different. This is real wine. It's not grape juice. It goes through the normal process of fermentation and everything else that wine goes through. An amazing process, by the way. I love sitting down and listening to these sommeliers that are really knowledgeable about the process of winemaking. It's amazing. So we get a bottle of wine, and then in the end, we boil the wine and remove the alcohol. So the taste of the wine is still there. Tried it myself many times. We have both a semi-sweet and a dry wine, and it's really terrific. And I think all of those of you that don't want to drink wine, but want to hold that glass and enjoy something that tastes just as good, maybe even better to some of you, this is it. Non-alcoholic wine, Franzese brand, one of a kind, first online, and then you'll be able to get it in markets throughout the country. This is really an offer that you shouldn't refuse. And I think this is going to be so appealing to all those of you out there who want the real taste of wine and want the enjoyment of having a glass of wine with your family, but not getting maybe some of the side effects that alcohol will do for you sometimes. So pick it up, non-alcoholic wine, Franzese brand. Again, I always give you an offer that you shouldn't refuse.
Well, yeah, and there's a few points to pick up on the start, the end. Actually, something I'm very proud of. His tour manager said that I'm the only person that's managed ever to keep him on time in terms of the duration of the show. So I was pretty militant with him about, you know, wrapping up on time. And by the end of the tour, we had a great rapport. We'd spent so much time together. I felt comfortable to, you know, interject, interrupt, make fun, you know, and we had a great dynamic. It was really good. It's interesting that you touched on a couple of points that I was thinking about the entire time we were together and since, really. The first one about lying, you know, I have to say I lean much more in the direction of what Jordan is saying now, because one of the things that I really became aware of over time is that very often when you take these shortcuts, even if you're doing it for good reason, you're trying to protect people or, you know, not offend people, whatever it might be, it has a price down the line that you probably didn't expect. So those white lies end up in a situation where maybe the other person is expecting something else, or you're so used to lying, you can't tell what's a white lie or what's not a white lie anymore. And I think that's really ties into your second point, which is the real Michael. And I think the truth is, based on what I understand about the way Jordan thinks about it and how I've come to conceive of it, is both are the real Michael. You are capable, as anyone really, of great horror and great morality and achievement. And what I learned from Jordan is this thing of like every single small decision where you hear the voice of your conscience and you make a different decision to what it's telling you, that's taking you down the path to something else. And so when you let yourself slip on small things, eventually you end up slipping on big things. And I've had that in my life where, oh, I get a ticket because I didn't feel like finding the right place to park. And I do this and, I'm making good money. I can afford to pay the ticket. Who cares? This and that. And before I know it, I've actually done things I'm really not happy about. And they're not disconnected from making that original decision. So the thing that I really took away from him is who the real Michael is or who the real Konstantin is not really about ideas or what you believe or any of that. It's fundamentally about what decisions are you making day to day. So in your case, you left your past life behind you and you are now making the right decision over and over and over for decades. Well, that's the real Michael. But all it takes, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but is one slip up and then another slip up and another slip up. And before you know it, you're really in a bad way, which is why it's so important to not be soft, to not get weak, to not allow yourself the indulgence of, you know what, I don't need to do this, or, oh yeah, I can afford to do that, or all of this stuff. So there's a kind of moral self-discipline that he instills, which I thought was really important. And I think it speaks to what you're talking about, which is we're all capable of terrible things and we're all capable of good things, and it's a choice. And that choice is not always made in the moment. By the time you've arrived in that room where you've had to step out of yourself and do terrible things, you've made about 20 other choices that put you in that room that mean you no longer have a choice. In that moment, you don't have a choice. There's a great, I wrote about this in one of my Substacks. There's a great line in one of the Matrix movies, I think the second one, where Neo, the main character, I don't know if you've seen The Matrix. No. Okay. Well, the main character goes to meet this woman who's an oracle, who's like a fortune teller. And he starts to realize at this point in the movie that the oracle can really tell him a lot about him and the future. And he's trying to understand, are there people who can predict the future? And do I have choice? And do I have personal agency? And the oracle offers him a piece of candy. And he goes, do you know if I'm going to take it? Do you know if I'm going to accept this candy? And she says, I wouldn't be much of an oracle if I didn't. And he's, well, how can I make a choice if you already know? And she says, you didn't come here to make a choice. You've already made it. You are here to understand why you made it. And that's one of the things I've really learned over time, especially from my time with Jordan, is by the time you're in that place doing that thing that you don't want to be doing, you've done a lot of other things already that you could have not done that wouldn't have put you in that room in the first place. And I think that's where the truth of who we are is. We are the sum total of the decisions we've made.
No, I agree with that. And just from my own personal life, I've said this many times, you could take the boy out of Brooklyn. You can't always take Brooklyn out of the boy. So you're right. If something is in you and you're capable of doing something, well, that can appear, at almost any moment or any time. And it's best not to put yourself in that position or do things that lead you to possibly be in that position at some point. But yeah, it's interesting. And I'm glad, you spent more time with him, obviously, than I have. But the time I've spent with him has been it's very educational, very enjoyable, and certainly learned some things from him. And I continue to watch him. I'm sure you will too. And it's good that we have a relationship. Let me get into something. You and I, last time we met was at on your podcast, Triggernometry. You know what I noticed that day? Francis was questioning me a lot more than you were. Were you more observant? Is that how you normally do it, or?
That's interesting. You know what? Usually I am the one that will have the harder debates with people. So if you were saying something fundamentally that I didn't agree with, I probably would have taken over and I would have been, hold on, Michael, what about this and that? But actually a lot of the stuff that you were saying made sense to me. So I just Francis is the dynamic with us is I'm usually the ideas guy. I'm interested in the big picture, big ideas, whereas he is interested in the personal story and the personal narrative and how people felt and what it meant to them and stuff like that. So with your story, obviously there's a lot of both, but primarily your story is one which is about the relationships you built and the life you led and the conclusions you reach. So that's why I think Francis leaned heavily into it more than I. But we have a great partnership, and there are interviews when I am asking most of the questions. There are times when he's asking most of the questions. And the one thing that I really learned from the time that him and I have been doing trigonometry 6 years now is how important in any relationship is for people to remember that the relationship is the most important thing. Like the thing you are there to do together matters a lot more than me or him or my ego or his ego or my desire to get my question in or whatever. And luckily we've been able to manage it because we've been able to keep both our egos in check over that time, which is actually, as I'm increasingly learning by seeing other people who are working together, it's actually quite rare, particularly in our space where people in the public eye are usually above average, let's say, on narcissism. So, in our space, that's pretty unusual. So we're very, very lucky. And, we've had our ups and downs. We've had our arguments, our fallings out, but we always remembered why we are where we are. It's because we work together and we have different skills and talents. So it's been a great partnership. And I've really enjoyed the conversation, listening to the things that you were talking about as well.
Yeah, me too. I thought it was one of the better interviews that I've done over the years. Let me ask you this: were you aware of the kind of controversy around me on my last visit to the UK?
I didn't know there was a controversy around your visit to the UK, Michael. I still don't know about it. Tell me.
Well, let me explain. Prior to my
Sure.
coming for the tour, and this was 2 months ago, I went to Romania and spent a weekend with Andrew and Tristan Tate.
Right.
And had great interviews with them. They were very accommodating, had my wife and daughter with me, and was great. And I think the interview with Andrew was one of the better interviews that he's done, at least from the comments. People were telling me that. He was really relaxed, really himself, and it was great. Tristan also. So prior to heading to the United Kingdom, I posted a photo of me with the Tates. And me and my wife and daughter actually with the Tates. When I got there, there was a woman in Parliament. Her name was Alison something, Thiel, I think, that was in an uproar that labeled me as a misogynist because I was friends with Andrew and Tristan. She tried to have me removed from the country. She actually, all 10 dates that I had, all 10 venues, she went to each venue and threatened to them that they would lose their business license if they held the event. Now, don't forget, this was, well in advance. Many ticket holders had their tickets, and she just caused a real firestorm. My promoters had to go to each venue. We had to change the venue because all the venues were afraid to lose their license. So they canceled on us. The tour went well. We actually had standing room only as a result of all the media that she caused. But what's your thoughts on that? I mean, this woman, and I said to her, misogynist, I have a wife, a very independent wife. I have 5 very independent daughters. I've never been accused of that. She went as far as saying or I don't know if it was her or one of her accomplices, that said that Andrew was going to be a major part of my speaking event, that I actually had him on video once bringing it into the UK. It was all untrue. I mean, I've been doing this 25 years. Andrew has nothing to do with anything that I'm doing on my tour. But really a firestorm. And, I don't, first of all, I'd like to know what your thoughts are on the Tates and what you think of that kind of drama occurring, in your country now, I would say.
Well, there's a few things to separate out. I think, first of all, what happened with you, I think, is completely ridiculous. And actually, it shows it's not just a one-off thing with you. There is a kind of creeping inability to have nuance about these things. So, for example, my opinion on Andrew Tate is that I don't think his message is good. I don't think it's good for young men. He's not somebody whose message I personally am interested in promoting. And I don't say that because, he's been accused of things. People are innocent until they're proven guilty. So until he's, proven guilty of stuff, then he's not guilty, at least in my eyes, or certainly shouldn't be treated as such under the law and otherwise. I just don't like the things that he's telling young men. I don't think they're constructive. I don't think they're helpful. Unlike you, actually, who I think has a very positive message, which is why it's funny for someone to call you misogynist, because I watched many of your videos, and one of the things I think I mentioned to you when we had you on the show is how strongly it comes through the relationship with your wife and with your daughters, and how much they respect you and have a lot of love for you. And that wouldn't be the case if you were someone who was that way. So, but even all of that aside, this kind of guilt by association is something that's increasingly now used, especially in Britain. And these people are just prepared to lie brazenly about someone like you and say, oh, you had a photo with this guy, you had an interview with this guy, therefore we're going to make stuff up about you, or therefore we're going to cancel your shows. And we've just got to a level of creeping authoritarianism where people are completely incapable of treating these things with nuance. So it's quite a common occurrence now. There was a couple of years ago, I was defending a comedian who is admittedly a very offensive comedian, but he's one of the best comics in Britain, Jerry Sadowitz, whose show was cancelled from a comedy festival because some person who was working the door or something didn't like the content, you know. And I'm very fortunate to spend more and more time in America, where I feel like this is much less likely, because not only do you have a First Amendment, you also have, much more importantly, a First Amendment culture. Still, there is still, you know, the overall majority of Americans still think, well, this is America. Like, you're allowed to say whatever the hell you want, and I'm allowed to say whatever the hell I want. And if we don't agree, well, tough, right? In the UK, there is much more of this. Oh, a comedian made a joke, well, he mustn't be allowed to do any more jokes, or somebody said something offensive. And, you know, it starts to creep into the law. So we've had numerous cases in the UK where people have been prosecuted for, you know, private messages in WhatsApp groups, or making some kind of offensive joke somewhere, or you know, putting a YouTube video out that somebody thought that was racist or whatever. And it just speaks to a complete intolerance of freedom of expression, which I think, as someone who doesn't come from a Western country, I actually thought that's the whole point. Like, that's what the West is based on. That's why we are technologically as successful as we are, because we have freedom of research, i.e., people are free to pursue whatever they think and express controversial ideas. It's one of the reasons that many other things that are the core of our success are the way they are. It's because we're free to speak. And yes, that means sometimes people are going to speak that you don't like. That's the price we pay for having the successful societies that we have. And I just think, you know, a few years ago, I wrote a book called An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West. And it was really a call to action to people in the West to go, come on, like, wake up. Like, you're throwing away the very thing that made your society great. Don't do that. Remember what made us who we are here in the West. And I'm very concerned that on many of those things, we're sliding into something that really isn't who we are.
Well, you know, I agree with all that. I'm glad you adhere to the principle, you know, whether it be the Tates or anybody else, that you're innocent until proven guilty. I think this person in Parliament had a problem with my saying that, and I've said that, you know, resoundingly over the past year with respect to the Tates. And, you know, I think you're going to be a little surprised. And listen, I understand Andrew can be abrasive, and I think that's part of what he does. You know, he has a tremendous following, obviously. But the time I spent with him was really eye-opening. He was very sensitive, really down to earth. And I got to be honest, I really enjoyed being with him and Tristan. I've been communicating with them now for a little over a year, you know, about their case and other things. So it was good. You should watch the interview. I think you might see a little bit of a different side of him, and you know, just take it from
Oh, I'm sure. And I suspect that if I sat down with Andrew, we'd have a great conversation. He's clearly an interesting guy. You don't get to be that successful if you don't have something. And that's, it's not, everything I'm saying about him is not a personal disrespect. I'm just looking at what are the ideas that he's putting forward. And when I see the message young men take away from what he's saying, I haven't listened to every piece of Andrew Tate content in existence, so I don't know exactly. But it seems to me that one of the things that's happening, particularly in the online space, Michael, is that men and women are encouraged to see each other as enemies. They're
right.
encouraged to see each other as combatants. And let's be honest, Andrew Tate didn't start this. It was the radical feminists that started this, right?
Absolutely.
They wanted to antagonize women against men. Men are the patriarchy, men are the worst, blah, 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 blah. And as someone who really loves women and wants the relationship between the sexes to be one of cooperation, which is what it's always been, right, throughout history, I was very anti that type of feminism from the beginning, not least because I always thought that one of the things that would happen is it would produce an equal and opposite reaction, which is what always happens, right? If you push people in one direction, they're going to strike back. So I don't have any personal issue with Andrew Tate, but I do see a lot of the people who imbibe his message, whose view of women now is, oh, they're all after your money, they're all after this, go out and exploit them, go out and take advantage. Women are, and there's all these other messages that I don't think are healthy if we want men and women to work together, which is what I want. So from that, and some of the stuff, you're clearly a great dad. When I heard Andrew say that, a dad needs to be around once a year in his kids' lives, I just went, well, it's very difficult to be a good dad if that's what you're doing. And I think fathers are very important. I mean, one of the reasons that there's so much disorder and crime and all sorts of other social dis-ease in society is we have more and more broken homes, more and more kids growing up without fathers. So I think encouraging men to be there in their kids' lives is probably a better thing than encouraging not to be. So for me, I always it's become very difficult because people take criticism of ideas as being criticism of the person nowadays.
Yeah.
I don't really, I try, sometimes I fail. Sometimes I don't follow Jordan Peterson's advice of making all the right decisions. I try not to criticize people, but I think it's very important to criticize ideas that I think don't work. And so the only thing I'm not saying I couldn't sit down and have a cigar and a whiskey with Andrew and have a great time. But from the message that I have seen, I don't agree with it and I don't think it's healthy. And I think we should be able to say that about it. You might have ideas that I disagree with. I might have ideas that you disagree with. And as two men, we can sit down and have that conversation and remain friends. That's what I think is really important. So that's all I'm saying when it comes to Andrew Tate.
Yeah, and I agree with you all the way. And it's one of the major issues that are plaguing the United States right now is this division in ideas that people can't talk about them anymore. There's
Right.
such volatile feelings on both sides. It's really gotten out of control, and it's terrible in that regard. But I think I know for sure if you would sit down with Andrew and just see that side of him, surprised. I never heard him say that about being once in a year with your children, because he speaks really glowingly of his kids and his relationships with them. So, and Tristan also, but. Anyway, that's hopefully you'll get to meet him one day and you'll form your own decisions with respect to that. But I do believe that the government is really out to get them because of this idea that they put out there. And I try to tell people the same thing. I say, listen, when you're teaching men to be men in every respect, you're benefiting women. You're not hurting women. You're benefiting them. You're not demeaning them in any way. And I think that's the message that he is giving. He gives it a little bit differently at times, I would say that. I may not say it the same way, but I know what the thought behind it. So anyway, I hope you get the chance to meet him because I think you'll enjoy the back and forth with him.
Well, yeah, and Michael, just on that point, actually, I think one of the things that that aggressive feminism did ruin for men and women is the understanding, and you'll know this way better than I do. Really, men learn how to be men from other men, and the less male involvement young men have in their lives, particularly good male involvement, the less likely they are to be good, upstanding citizens, to treat the women in their lives well, etc. So we definitely need more men stepping up and more men taking responsibility. And we need a lot less of the kind of anti-male narratives that we see in Hollywood movies and in popular culture. To be sure, we need men to be better. And that means, that's why, we started the conversation with Jordan, and I think he's a great example of what a man in the public eye should be and what he should be doing for other people.
Well, you're right. And you nailed something. This whole feminist movement that began years ago, recently, at least in the States, has been exposed as nothing but hypocrisy. because when you talk about these transgender athletes competing with females, and this movement not being vocal about it, not opposing it at all, but being very quiet about it, they've been exposed. I mean, when something becomes difficult for a certain group, they don't want to approach it. When it's easy and they don't get any pushback, it's okay. But all of a sudden they're quiet. We haven't heard any feminists come out strongly against transgender women, or whatever they are, men, in female sports. And it's terrible what's going on here. I mean, women are actually getting hurt as a result of it. They're certainly losing scholarships. They're not able to compete with them. It's obvious. But the feminist movement, quiet, dead, doesn't say a word. You don't hear anything about it.
That's interesting. In the UK, the feminists are actually some of the people at the very forefront of challenging transgender ideology. J.K. Rowling and MPs like Rosie Duffield. And I think there are some feminists in America who are also very, very anti-it. But I agree with you that they've been exposed. And one of the things I see a lot of them, that they keep trying to pivot the whole conversation about transgender stuff into, well, these are just men. And it comes back to like men are bad and these women, and I'm just going like, you really have missed the point here. And this, whenever you have this, whenever you generalize about large groups of people in that way, you're always going to be so wrong, because large groups of people are incredibly varied. And so to say all men are like this or men are like this, it's usually going to be unhelpful. But yeah, the trans thing is, it almost speaks to like, I go back, I've got family all over the former Soviet Union, in Russia, Ukraine, Armenia. And I go back and they say to me, oh, so you do interviews. What was your last conversation? And I'll say, well, we had this person on and we were talking about this transgender issue. And they'll say to me, well, what's that about? And then I try to explain it to people who haven't been marinating in this lunacy for the last however many years. And they just look at me like I'm insane. Because, well, of course, because this stuff is insane. The idea that you can be like, you know what, abracadabra, I'm now Stacy. I mean, that's insanity. That's not a real thing. That's something that people just made up on a university campus somewhere, and now we're all supposed to go along with it. And there's a whole month that we are supposed to celebrate. It's madness, and it's got nothing to do with reality. That's not to say, historically, there have been some people who felt more comfortable dressing as the opposite sex and all of that. And, all power to you. It's a free country. But to get other people to pretend that makes you something else biologically, that entitles you to participate in female sports, when we know the biological differences are so stark between men and women. When, we've had people who are rapists, Michael, rapists with penises, claim they've got what I call prison onset gender dysphoria. And they get to the courtroom and suddenly, oh, I'm feeling a bit dysphoric. We've had these people put in women's prisons, right? 6'4" bloke with a penis, raped someone, says, I'm a woman. Oh, off to the female prison. I mean, this is madness. And so I just think it's a very good example of what my friend Douglas Murray calls the madness of crowds. It's the naked emperor. It's the whole mass indoctrination of people with stuff that, and I'm sure you've seen this in various parts of your life. A lot of people, unfortunately, just want to keep their head down. They want to get along to go along to get along, whatever the phrase is. They don't want to be the one that stands up and says, actually, excuse me, I don't think this is the right thing. And if not enough people stand up and say something, you can end up in all this craziness very, very quickly.
I totally agree with all of that, everything that you've said. And, the thing is, these transgender people and people that are very progressive, that lean very far left, they seem to also hate our country, America.
They do.
The message to them, well, let's go try and live in Russia or China or Iran or any of these places. You wouldn't exist. And it was interesting that you said when you talk about this to people, let's say in Russia, they don't even know what you're talking about because it's so foreign to them for something like this to even exist. And that's the sad thing about it, because these are the same people that hate America, knock America, talk about this country, and don't realize they can't exist in many other places throughout the world.
Well, right. It's like these queers for Palestine lunatics as well. It's like, I mean, what are you talking about, right? And you know, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, I think what you're talking really about, and I've said this for a long time now, you know, we've taught at least two generations of American and British kids to hate their own societies and their own civilization. Um, and I think one of the reasons it's happening is we're just so comfortable. We're so comfortable, and life is so comparatively easy. And when life is easy, you know, I'm sure you can tell me more about, you know, in your former life, this probably was an issue. It's kind of hard to keep, if you've built some kind of business empire or mafia empire, whatever that is, you know, you might pass that down to your son, and you created it. He might manage it. But the third generation, usually, they don't know what the hell they're doing. They just want to party, and everything goes tits up, as we say here in the UK. So people are very suspicious of families that have been able to preserve wealth and success, whether it's the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds or whoever, because it's very difficult to keep comfortable young people locked in on what the mission is, right? On what the prize is, on how the empire that they now benefit from was built. Um, and I think that's partly why we are where we are, because we don't have to fight for food. We don't have to fight for survival. We don't have, you know, America is such an optimistic go-getter place because you're a nation of people who had to tame a continent. You know, you turned up in this vast expanse full of you know, enemies and hostile creatures and poisonous and venomous, all of that, right? And you had to tame an entire continent and build it from the ground up. Well, you've done that, and now a lot of people are just living with the fruits of that, but they no longer remember how the garden was planted from which they now benefit. And I think that's a big part of the reason why, sadly, we are where we are.
Yeah, I agree. You know, and something I've noticed in traveling around the world, even most recently in the UK, and I was recently in Monaco and France, so many people are aware of what's going on in the United States. They really are. They're really in tune with it. And unfortunately, most of the you know, comments that I've got recently, what's happening to your country? Why is your country going down? What's going on? And it's really disturbing to hear that, obviously. And, you know, I would love to talk to you about some of the things that are going on here in the United States because,
Mm.
you know, I'm a very optimistic guy normally. I mean, to the point where my wife said, stop, because my response to everything is don't worry about it. We'll handle it. We'll fix it. But recently, I have a little more reason for optimism because I see a pushback. But for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been pretty pessimistic about the direction this country is going in. And I'm just hopeful and prayerful that it's going to turn around. I'm seeing people now starting to really push back, but this whole progressive movement that's going on here, Konstantin, is insane in my view. And I don't know, do you consider yourself conservative? Are you more liberal? Are you more centrist? What's your ideology in that regard?
Yeah, I don't. So a lot of people try and say that I'm conservative, and I think I definitely have some conservative ideas, but they're only conservative ideas because all the stuff that I believe used to be center left ideas of 10, 15 years ago, right? Like in my book, I have a whole chapter where I just quote left wing politicians talking about the border in the way that I talk about the border, which is immigration is great if you bring in the right people who are smart, driven, talented, who are going to contribute to a society. But bringing in criminals, bringing in people who don't meet the criteria your country's chosen, who are coming illegally across a border where they're not supposed to, that's a bad idea, right? Like countries need borders. And everybody from Chuck Schumer to Nancy Pelosi to Barack Obama, they all used to say this. They all used to believe it. You know, I believe that, you know, children are a good thing. I believe that I don't think the world is going to burn up in 12 years if we don't end up using fossil fuel. Like, I believe that a mother and a father are necessary and ideal for a child to be raised properly. You know, whatever, you know, I don't believe that you can change your biological sex. I believe that free speech really is very important. I believe that, you know, of course, yeah, we don't want, you know, extreme nationalism, but I don't think people should be criticized or attacked for saying they love their country. You know, I think we need people to say, you know, I love America, I love the UK. And I remember, it was really, it is something that really brought it home to me, probably about, it would have been in the early 2000s when my wife and I became British citizens. And just before that, our application for basically like the British green card equivalent, it was, and again, I talked about this in the book, it was denied because the person in the department that handled the stuff made a mistake. And so I had to get a lawyer, pay them a lot of money to get all this squared away. And I remember she said to me, in this form, we need to write down, how you feel about Britain, how you feel about this country. And I was, I'm a young guy. I'm in my mid 20s, probably early 20s at this point. And I really am grateful for the opportunities that Britain gave me. And I said, you know what, if this country was attacked, I would volunteer to go and defend it. I would volunteer to go and fight. I don't know how much use I would be, but I would volunteer, right? And she looked at me and she went, yeah, we shouldn't put that down. Because it was kind of like it's cringe to say you'd go and fight for your country. And I just think this is not a healthy society does not think about itself in this way. So my perspective is, I guess most people would probably, if you look at all the things that I believe, you probably put me in a liberal category, like a classically liberal category. I having grown up in the Soviet Union, I think that there's almost nothing as bad as progressivism in terms of political ideology. These people are utopian lunatics who will burn down the society they live in because they believe that they can remake it better. And we've seen, in the Soviet Union, in Maoist China, all over the world, what happens when they actually get to power, right? And all they do is they install a tyranny of their own, murder millions of people, ruin the economy, starve millions of people to death. And by the way, the people who are on your college campuses running around screaming about, socialism and communism and all of this stuff, they're the first ones up against the wall getting shot by the people who actually end up in power, right? By the way, deservedly so. I do approve of that part of it. But apart from that, you know what I'm saying? So my view is I'm really, and I imagine you're like this too, Michael, I'm much less interested in ideology. I'm a lot more interested in what works. Is this idea that you're telling me about, is this actually something that works? Does it have the right trade-offs? Because this is one of the things we've lost. You've got this, for my money, probably one of the greatest modern philosophers, economists, commentators, and Thomas Sowell, who actually think he lives out there in California, not far from you, brilliant guy. And one of his famous lines is, "There are no solutions, only trade-offs." And people have completely forgotten that, like, yeah, you can have more of this, but you're going to lose more of that. Where do you want to balance things? And we now live in a world where people just think, well, if you don't want more of this, then you're a bad guy, you're evil. Like, if you don't want more immigration, that's because you're racist. Well, you know what? A lot of immigrants don't want illegal immigration because, like, the country I come from, if I knew that the dregs of my society were being imported into Britain, I'd be the first one going, hold on a second, I don't want Russian petty criminals and thieves and murderers coming in here. So I'm much more interested in common sense. Does your idea work in reality? Is this going to make our society better or worse? As opposed to these, like, I have to, I'm Republican and therefore I have to believe all of this, including all this stuff that doesn't work. Or I am Democrat and I have to believe all this stuff, including all this stuff that doesn't work. I just think reality is a lot more complex than an ideology or a bumper sticker. And so to me, what I'm always trying to do is encourage people to think for themselves. There will be times when in the past I probably would have voted Democrat. There'll be times in the future, I hope to God, that whatever's happening to the Democratic Party now, if I'm ever an American citizen, I would hope that there is a Democratic Party that a sensible, sane person like me can vote for at some point. Right now, like, I mean, like, I don't have, as you can see, I don't have any words. You've got a guy who is like, I don't think he was even in the beginning stages of dementia. Like, after what we saw the debate, I mean, his brain is mush, and I don't say that with any pleasure, because I wouldn't say that about, there's no pleasure in someone being that sick. That's who you've got as president, and he's running for another 4 years when everyone can see that he's not even fit to be president now. So, as long as one side is going off the rails, and by the way, as we talked about earlier, it's going to produce an equal and opposite reaction. And you're going to see a derangement on the right happening of some kind in response to all of the crazy progressive lunacy that you're talking about. So my view is the more sensible our views, the more sensible our policies, the more they're measured towards reality, the more we go, okay, we've got this idea, now we're going to try it out and see. And then we're going to use that feedback to try out something else. So it's not that I'm, against helping poor people. I'm for helping poor people. I just don't think giving them money is always the way to help them. Or, people talk often about I mean, it's so tragic spending time in the US, this beautiful country, and then you go to every big city and just the center of town is filled with homeless people who are clearly mentally ill, right? Now, why is that? People say, oh, we've got all this money to give Ukraine and give it to that and give it to that. We can't even look after those people. It's not a money thing. It's not a money thing. It's an ideology thing. They decided to close the mental asylums and the mental hospitals because admittedly, some of them were not good places, right? But instead of improving those places, what they did is said, we got to give these people freedom, right? Freedom. We're going to give you freedom. And freedom means you're mentally ill. You can't run your life. So go on the street, take drugs to self-medicate. That's freedom. So all of this stuff is bad ideas that are not being tested in reality. And when they see reality, they don't counter, they don't adjust what they were doing. Like when you were running a business or you're running a business now, you try something, you launch a new product. That product doesn't work. What do? You shut it down, you try something else. You don't double down and keep pouring money into something that doesn't work. But it just seems like with politics, that's exactly what you do. You have an idea, it's a terrible idea, it doesn't work, and you go, oh, it didn't work because these other evil guys didn't give us enough money. Let's pour more money into this bad idea that doesn't work. So, and it's sad to see a great country like the United States, the great country in the world now, going down this path. And like you, I'm someone personally extremely optimistic. I'm always super optimistic. But when I look at the direction of the West, I think we have a limited amount of time to turn this around, truthfully. And if we don't, we will not survive in the way that we currently think of what the West is. There's a big difference between the Roman Empire and Italy. And I love Italy. I go to Italy regularly. It's one of the most wonderful countries in the world. But there's a difference between being the most powerful nation in history, as the Roman Empire was at the time, and selling ice cream on the ruins of that former great civilization. It's not the same thing. And so I really wouldn't want the West to end up going downhill. And one of the reasons is I have seen the other side. I've been to other places. I've grown up in other places. Believe me, you do not want Russia to be the dominant country in the world or China to be the dominant country in the world if you're a Western person, because the things you hold dear, they're not going to be respected in the same way that they currently are. So yeah, we've got to reinstill confidence in our society, in our civilization, our values. And it starts with education, which right now is teaching kids to hate their own country instead of to love it.
Well, I can tell you this, everything that you said, the ideology that you have, it shouldn't be put in the box of conservatism. It should be, rational, reasonable, and sensible. Because everything you express, that's what those principles are. They're rational, reasonable, and sensible. And what's happened, I think, in the progressive movement, they just distorted and destroyed all of that reason. And I can tell you this, I firmly believe that I hate to look at Donald Trump as a savior, but he happens to be the person right now. If this election doesn't go that way and we have another 4 years we're not going to have 4 years of Biden, that's obvious, he's not going to make it, but 4 years of progressive power, this country is not going to survive. It's just not. Because especially after that debate, I mean, everybody knows we're in a shambles here as far as our government at this point in time. And this progressive movement is going to take over. Either that or that there's going to be a real revolution in this country. And, for me, it's all about maintaining power and control. These people have had too much of a good taste of it. They don't want to rescind it. The whole theory at the border, the whole plan at the border from day one has been to bring people in and some way, shape, or form, give them the power to vote, turn every state blue, and there will never be another Republican president. There'll never be another party other than the Democratic Progressive Party. I don't even call them Democrats anymore. It's not the party that I grew up with. And, I think we're going to be doomed. We're going to be in a lot of trouble. Aside from
Well,
that,
I really hope that I really hope it doesn't come to that. And I have my reservations about Donald Trump, but it's a binary choice, and I've been very much keeping my opinions to myself. And by the way, look, I'm not an American, so it's not for me to tell your Americans how to vote. Your country. We care about America because you are the leader of you are the leader of the free world. You are the leader of the Western civilization, and so what happens in America affects us as well, and that's why we care. But I just think with I hope that our audience doesn't take away from this that you or I are like partisan political people, because I don't think either of us is. But what I think it's important for people to understand is, we're not the only ones who are watching that debate, Michael.
I
We're not
know.
the only ones. Vladimir Putin's watching that debate. Xi Jinping is watching that debate. The mullahs of Iran are watching that debate. Hezbollah are watching that debate. Hamas are watching that debate. A lot of people around the world are making decisions all the time based on, can we do business with America? Should we fear America? Can we mess around with America? And what you've seen, is that when America takes its eye off the ball, the world doesn't go in the right direction. Not for me. So I want America to have a great president. I want America to have great leadership. I want Americans to be doing better all the time, because that's how I know the world's going to be in a better place. That's what we need. And whatever people's party political views are, we are so way past that. You need somebody in charge. Like, I mean, the obvious question to ask you, Michael, is what would happen to one of the big families in New York if it had a Joe Biden in charge? What would the other families be doing?
It would eat him up. I mean, that family wouldn't exist anymore. It would be taken over.
Right.
You described it perfectly. I mean, I actually am kept up at night, especially after that debate, because we know we have enemies out there. What are they thinking? Are they thinking, well, now this guy is finished, this party is finished. If we're going to do anything that's aggressive, we better do it now before Trump gets into office. I mean, all of these things have to come into your head, and I've said this, Konstantin, I'm 73 years old. My life is, I'm going to be okay no matter who gets in office. But I worry about my 7 kids, my 7 grandchildren, what this country is going to look like in the future. And it's not a question of, Donald Trump's the best thing in the world and this and that. What's going on now in the Democratic Party, it's just awful. I mean, for Joe Biden, and I'm going to be honest with you, I say this, I'm a Christian, and I hate to have these thoughts, but I actually have almost a hatred for Joe Biden. I just think he's a bad, bad man, because the things that I've seen him do, for a guy to get up there and the other day after the debate, I don't know if you watched, when he was in North Carolina and he makes his comeback speech, oh, I had a bad night. But one thing I know, he said, this is a quote, I know how to tell the truth. This is the guy that never tells the truth about anything. And he's either delusional, he believes in his own lies, which is scary to have somebody in power that's got control over our lives. But he's taken us down such a bad path. I have no empathy and no sympathy for him whatsoever, because he's been in government for 50 years now. He knows the racks. I know what he's done with his son. I can see right through it, the influence peddling and all of that. You've basically sold out this country. But what's worse than that is the biggest threat you have to any country, to our country right now, is number one, when you weaponize the Department of Justice, the FBI, the federal agencies to go after your political enemies. And number two, when the media covers for that. And we have both of those things happening now. And that's really the signs of a nation in bad decline and one party becoming the ruler, the monarchy. And if we don't put a stop to it, America's not going to be the greatest country in the world anymore. And I see that happening. And that's why I have this pessimistic view. Now people are starting to wake up. They're fighting back. But what I say here, this is an underhanded party that we have here. And they're going to pull out all stops in the next couple of months. And who knows what's going to happen in this election. Nothing is in the bag. Joe Biden can be as demented as possible. It's still not in the bag, because they're going to pull out all stops. And I'll be honest with you, I'm really concerned. I really worry about that. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not a prophet in that regard, and I'm not making bold statements because of what happened last time. But I'm glad to see somebody that doesn't live in this country have such a sensible point of view towards what's going on in this country, what's needed, because you're right. America is the leader of the free world. And if you have a weak America, everybody's freedom is in jeopardy.
Yeah, and this is what I think there are portions of the right now that are starting to withdraw and have this very isolationist position. So this is happening within the Republican Party as well, which worries me because it's we just talked about this. They talk about, oh, we need a multipolar world. We need to respect Russia and China. And you look at what's happening in Mexico. What happens when you take out the dominant cartel? You come in, you arrest all their leaders. What happens? Everybody fights for dominance until there's a new dominant cartel, right? So I'm not the reason I want America to remain the greatest superpower in the world is I'm aware it's not just because I think Western values are better, which by the way they are. It's also because I know that what would ensue when America ceases to be the most dominant country in the world is not some utopian, peace-loving, gradual takeover. What will happen is a power struggle on a geopolitical level in a world in which we have nuclear weapons. I don't think that's where the outcome that we should be going to. So, I thought, the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, they were mistakes. That does not mean America doesn't have a role in making sure that the world is in order. And I would like the people who run your country to remember that that there's a whole world out there. I know I know all this. I travel around America, Oklahoma, and like I meet people in a cigar bar in Oklahoma, and I can understand they have absolutely no reason to give a damn about what happens in Eastern Europe. Like they've got a great life, more or less. And why would you think about things like that? But you got to remember, like you are in charge of the entirety of our civilization, which it started in Greece and in Rome, and then the British Empire carried the torch, and now the United States is. But we're all part of one big group of people who share values that are actually quite unique in human history, and protecting and preserving that is very, very important. So we need the United States to be strong. And I don't really care left, right, whatever. I just want sensible people in charge, who care about their country and who are prepared to do difficult, unpopular things, because that's what it's going to take, Michael. Let's be honest, right? One of the reasons both your country and mine are in so much trouble nowadays is we have leaders who are not prepared to make tough decisions. They're not prepared to be unpopular. And that means they're not real leaders because, as you know from your own experiences, leadership means you say to people, look, I know not all of us want to do this. I know this is going to hurt. But we're going in this direction because I have a vision of how we're going to get through this, and we're going to come out the other end, and we're going to be better. And yes, it's going to cost me, you, and you a little bit of something now, or maybe a lot of something now, but it's the only way we're going to thrive and survive 10, 15, 20 years from now. It's the only way our children and grandchildren are going to thrive. That's what leadership is. And I just don't see a lot of that flying around at the moment.
No, it's not here. And, we're being, you know, we're being compromised in so many different ways. I mean, we have a national debt that's up to $35 trillion. You cannot,
Crazy.
it's impossible to get out from under that. And it's growing. It's not like it's going to stop. And unfortunately, our leadership, and I use that term very lightly, they don't understand that. Either they do or they don't know how to get hold of it or whatever. And that's why I think in that regard, Donald Trump, we may have some advantage with him because he is a business guy. He understands you can't just be living constantly under, a mountain of debt. But there's so many ways that, I see destruction here, DEI, and all of this stuff that they're doing with our children. I think sometimes I wake up and I say, are we really going through this? Our leadership really, and I'll bounce to different things. Are they really saying that gender affirming surgery, which is basically mutilation in minors, is okay? They're advocating for that. Do we have doctors that are agreeing with that and encouraging that and proposing those solutions? Do we have a president that said, banning gender affirming surgery in minors is immoral? Am I really waking up and hearing this kind of stuff? So when I see this go to the degree that it's going, I'm saying if we don't put a dramatic, drastic stop to this, it's just going to overtake everyone. You're right. There was a lot of people on the right that just kept quiet because they didn't want to get criticized and abused in a way. But I see that starting to turn. People are starting to get angry. I really believe, that if Trump doesn't get elected, there's going to be some kind of blowback in this country, some kind of mini revolution. I don't want it. I don't want to see violence in the streets, but something is going to happen. I mean, I think we're on the precipice of some really good, bad stuff going on here. I really mean that.
Yeah. You know, I really hope it doesn't happen, but you know, the country's not in a good way. I guess the not to, you know, create depression in everyone who's watching this too much. So on the positive side of things, I think what I see, I think October 7th was a big wake up call for a lot of people, because when they saw progressives acting the way they did, basically siding with terrorists who butcher and massacre civilians like that, I think it woke a lot of people up. You know, my friend Bill Ackman, for example, who's become very vocal on this stuff. And I know that he reflects the views of a hell of a lot of people after October 7th, where prior to that, they weren't really paying attention. They were kind of probably default Democrats most of the time. You know, we vote for the Democrats because there's almost like a moral thing of like, I'm a Democrat because I'm a good person. I'm not one of those evil Republicans. But I'm not saying that's how he thought, but there are a lot of people who think that way. And then they start paying attention. And then what happens is it's, you know, it's kind of like you lift one rock and you find something under it, and then you suddenly start lifting all the rocks. And then you see, you know, one of the most eye-opening things I think for a lot of people is, you remember during Trump's presidency, we were told that he said there were fine people on both sides of Charlottesville. And lots of well-meaning people believed that. Well, we knew it was a hoax, and we tried to say something about it at the time. Not because I'm conservative, but because I care about the truth. I care about the truth, even when it's inconvenient to the left or the right, right? Well, now people are starting to find out about that. They're starting to find out about what the mainstream media and big tech did to the Hunter Biden story, right? Because, you know, you want to talk about election interference, which a lot of people do. Well, I think shutting down a piece of very important information on the eve of the election, that had an impact on that election. And I actually think that's probably a much stronger case for Trump to attack with than talking about ballots and whatever else. You should be talking about that. I think that would be a much stronger case for him. So people are waking up. I think a lot of ordinary people who maybe weren't paying that much attention are now starting to realize what's happening. It's taken them a while. And the great hope is, Michael, that people having woken up are going to elect someone who's actually going to sort the country out and never allow the progressive fringe to become in charge. It's the tail that's wagging the dog, or has been. And I see that, you know, we just had a woman called Brianna Wu on the show, trans woman called Brianna Wu. She's a progressive activist, and she's totally abandoned all of that. Still votes by Democrat and whatever, but she's saying, you know, we can't be supporting Hamas. We can't be supporting not letting parents know that their kids have got a new gender. We can't be supporting all this crazy nonsense. And so I'm enthused by things like that. I'm encouraged by things like that. And I just hope, my message to people always is the same. Just think for yourself. See past whatever tribal allegiances you're supposed to have. You know, we are this, therefore we vote this way. Forget that. Just think about what you see with your own eyes, what you hear with your own ears, and then make your own decision. And if that means in this election you vote Democrat, and the next one you vote Republican, and then you vote Democrat again, that's what someone with a brain does. That's what you do. You think for yourself, and then you make the right decision. And sometimes that might mean you vote the same way all your life. I respect that too. People are allowed to have that view. But just think for yourself, look at what's going on, think about what's actually going to make a positive impact in the world. Because, you know, you can't pretend we're in a good place. You just can't.
You know, it's funny too, when you talk about Israel, which is such a hot subject. When I did a Q&A at one of the events in the UK, somebody asked me what my position was in the Israeli war. And I said, well, I support Israel's right to exist. And Hamas doesn't want them to exist. Hezbollah doesn't want Israel to exist, nor does Iran. So I support them in every way. And I absolutely decry what happened on October 7th. Well, the person got very offended. Well, you don't know what's going on with the Palestinians. I said, you didn't hear what I said. I support Israel's right to exist. And those two organizations in that country doesn't want them to exist. They've said it many times. They want to blow them off the face of the earth, and no country has a right to do that. So I support Israel in that regard. And I think even that's been distorted here in the United States. And when I look at these people, who half of them don't even know what they don't even know what it's really all about. They just go on the side of whatever, especially these college kids.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, Michael. It's not whatever. See, they've got a very clear idea of how to know who's right and who's wrong, who's good and who's bad. And that is oppression. They've got this. And this, by the way, people should know this. This is straight out of the communist playbook. This is what people of my ancestors were taught in the Soviet Union, right? The idea, original Marxism, said that you can tell if someone is good or bad by how much money and power they have. So if someone is wealthy, they're bad. And if someone is poor, they're good. If someone is working class, they're good. Mm-hmm. If someone is a bourgeois aristocrat, they're bad. Well, what they realized, in the Western communists realized, is you'll never persuade people in America to think like that, because everyone in America wants to be rich, right? And thinks they're going to be rich one day. So then they made it about your race, your sex, your sexuality, and all of that stuff. And so these young kids are pro-Palestine because they see Palestinians as being oppressed because they have less power, without knowing a goddamn thing about what's happening there. Like, there are some well-educated people who know a lot, who are against Israel. I respect their right to have that view. I don't necessarily agree with them. But when I went to a protest, there's a video on our YouTube channel, and I just spoke to people on these protests, young people especially. They've got not a clue they are literally holding placards. And I said to them, what does this mean? And they have no idea, right? So to them, this oppressed thing, that's how they know. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to inject that point, which is, it's not random. They have been trained to think like this at their colleges, in their schools. They've been trained. And what we are now, you know who we are, Michael? We're like the school teacher, that woman teacher in your playground who runs over, sees a fight, and whoever is on top, that's the bad guy.
Yeah.
And you and I both know that ain't how it always goes down in a playground. Just because I'm on top doesn't mean you didn't start the whole thing.
No, you're absolutely right. Well, I got to tell you, it's good to talk to someone that is not an American citizen, is really on the outside looking in, and just has such a sensible view of everything that's going on here. We agree on everything you've said. I mean, I have no disagreement. I was going to see if there was a debate, but there really is none. But you know what? I like to think that we're on the side of reasonableness and sensibility, because I think it's going to take more people like that, with that approach, to try to straighten things out. It's going to be a battle. It's going to be very, very difficult. But I think the world, at least the world that's on hopefully the right side of things, needs to see America get straightened out. And I think these next couple of months are going to tell the tale. I think it's that significant. In my lifetime, there's never been a more critical election. That's for sure.
I definitely agree with you there. And thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure. I've always enjoyed watching some of your videos. And, I'd love to see more. You have such a beautiful family. It was a pleasure meeting your wife as well. I'd love to see more you talking about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a father, and all of that stuff, which you're very good on. So I'm going to keep watching your content. Thank you for having me. Would love to have you back on Triggernometry sometime. And it's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Well, we'll do that again. And I definitely want to have you on as we get closer to the election, or after the election at some point. I'd love to have you back on again. So we have a friendship. Let's keep it going.
Love it. And I'll give you a shout next time I'm in California as well.
That's for sure. If you don't, I'll hunt you down. I'll be upset with you.
Now, most people mean that metaphorically, Michael, but in your case, I have a feeling it could be literal. So I guess I'm going to have to do that now.
You got it, my friend. And listen, give my warmest regards to Francis. Enjoyed sitting with him also. And we'll see you again.
See you soon, Michael.
Take care now. Bye-bye.